Well, I got to tell you, there is a lot going on today, right? Not only did we honor our brand new national holiday, Juneteenth, earlier in our service, but we are also continuing with our FaithLift series today, and it's Father's Day. So there's a lot going on. And to be clear, just right off the top here, celebrating Father's Day means that we are giving thanks for all expressions of fatherly love in our lives, especially the ones that inspire us and encourage us and call us forth to be our best selves, to be the best that we can be, to grow into our ever greater good. And in doing this, we get to recognize that we are living in the 21st century. And so these wonderful beings of light who represent the role of father in our lives isn't necessarily male, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be the male gender, and he or she may or may not be from a biological relationship, but maybe from a chosen relationship. And so I encourage you to remember that just as we talk about on Mother's Day, that the divine masculine certainly is found in men, the divine feminine is found in men, it is also true that the divine masculine is found in women. In other words, we all share both spiritual qualities. And that's something that we just want to continue to become even more and more aware of. Now, are you with me on this? Oh, Marty Carter, today is your father's 111th birthday. Wow. Well, happy birthday. Okay, with that said, now, if you are a father, or if you serve in the role of father, or you might be a grandfather, or a great-grandfather, or a great-great-grandfather, you might even be a father-to-be, or maybe you're a critter father, right? But we want you to know that we love you, we bless you, we honor you, and we behold the divine that you are. So happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day. For me, this particular holiday always holds a very special meaning because in my family, we actually laid my father to rest on Father's Day. And it's kind of interesting over the years because that happened in 2001. Over the years, people will comment that must have been very, very hard for me. And, the truth is I've never looked at it that way. What better day than to, honor your father, lay your father to rest than on Father's Day, right? Now, this is especially true when I think about the epitaph that we have engraved on his headstone, which is, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." So that gives you a clue about my father. Now, and if you were wondering, this was not a hard decision to make because this was one of his favorite things to say and to sing. So Lord knows he was one quirky Aquarian. I know we got some Aquarians in our spiritual community here, so I know you know what I'm talking about. Now, before we move on, though, I also want to acknowledge that for this day, some of us, not a lot of fond memories. And I want to acknowledge that, it can be quite the opposite. And what I mean by that is maybe you didn't have such a great dad or such a great childhood. And so I just want to recognize that this holiday can bring up a lot of emotion. It might be a first Father's Day without your father, or maybe you still just deeply, deeply miss his presence in your life, right? Or you could be a father missing your son or daughter today, maybe for the first time, or one of the first times. So really, if you are feeling any of this today, just be with it and be gentle with yourself and be kind to yourself today. Give yourself an extra hug and know that you are loved. Now, if you've been tracking with us over these last weeks, then you know that we are in part 5 today of our FaithLift series with FaithLift 105, Every Man's Faith. And so I'm not going to recap 101 through 104 today, but I do encourage you to go to our YouTube channel where you can review them and catch up with them if you'd like to. It's good stuff. I mean, I rarely do a 6-part series. And next week will be number 6, and I have loved every minute of this. I hope that you are too. Now, since it is Father's Day, and since we are exploring faith, I just want to start with this. Many, now not all by any means, but many of the attitudes that we hold today are actually a reflection of how we were raised. Just think about it. For better or worse, growing up, what you were taught about some of the simple things are still with you. And so this reminds me of the story about the little girl who asked her mom one day, "Where do humans come from?" And the mom answered, "Well, God made Adam and Eve, and they had children, and that's who we've all descended from." Well, a few days later, the little girl, of course, goes and asks her dad, and her dad has a different answer. And he says, "Many years ago, there were monkeys from which all people evolved." Totally confused, the girl goes back to her mother and says, "Well, how is it possible that you said that God created us, but Daddy thinks that we evolved from monkeys?" And the mom says, "Well, dear, it's really quite simple. I told you about my side of the family, and your father told you about his." Now, I don't know about you, but even though this particular conversation didn't actually take place in my home, it could have. And so, as I was saying before, what you were taught growing up about some of the really simple things in life, like what you were raised to believe about self-discipline, for instance. Now, I know discipline is not necessarily a favorite word for some of us, but, for example, self-discipline, what we were taught growing up is still with us in some way, shape, or form. And so here are some questions that I want you to consider this morning. Growing up, were you encouraged to develop habits about a spiritual discipline, like a daily prayer practice? Were you raised in a home that valued generosity? In other words, were you taught to give consistently? Did you see your parents? Did you see your family be very generous of spirit? Or was giving in your family triggered by, some kind of a crisis or something like, earthquake or fires, some specific event, and then maybe, there might be some giving. And so this is the kind of self-discipline, especially spiritual self-discipline. And what I mean by that is your spiritual practice, that it's really time for you to put some focus on what you have taken with you into your adulthood. and the ones that you didn't, right? Now, be honest with yourself and ask yourself about the ones that did or didn't stick with you and why. Because how you answer these questions is very formative in terms of how you build your abiding faith. In other words, now you may think that you can skate by, and I know that sometimes, it might appear that you have, but you cannot. And this is why, it is said that there is no progress without discipline. Let me say that again. There is no progress without discipline. So you have to be willing at some point to do the work. This is why we say it works if you work it, right? It works if you work it. And so I want to shift gears here for just a minute, and I want to share with you about a segment that I saw on 60 Minutes just last Sunday evening. Now, this was a new piece that they aired with Simone Biles. Now, I don't know if you follow her in sports, but she is one of the most dominant athletes in the world right now, in the world. She is phenomenal in every sense of the word, truly. In fact, she hasn't lost a gymnastics all-around competition in 8 years. 8 years. And in a sport where the top competitors are separated by literally decimal points, she wins by whole numbers. Now, she is doing things, and maybe you've seen some footage of this over the last couple of weeks. There's a vault that she's doing that only men have done, and she's doing it magnificently well. Now, of course, Simone had hoped to crown her career with more Olympic golds last summer in Tokyo and then retire. But of course, we all know that the pandemic changed that, and it postponed the Tokyo Olympics to this July, which means that she had to create and find a whole new depth of discipline in order to continue to train for another year. I mean, just think about this. Imagine you're about to have your unprecedented Olympic hoorah, and then an unprecedented pandemic shows up and puts everything on hold. And you have to stay with it. You have to make a choice to stay with this grueling training. In fact, she said for 7 weeks, she got really, really depressed and just wasn't sure if she was going to be able to do it. But I'm grateful to say that she did, and she's ready. Now, this is, of course, also true of so many athletes and so many different things. But this really, really struck me. And it also really pulled at my heartstrings. This is a part about her life that I knew nothing about. And that's her early childhood and where she lived as a small child in Columbus, Ohio. She and her sister lived with her single mother, who was really, really struggling with drug addiction. And so the situation was so bad. I mean, no food, no money. It was so bad that social services actually took her and her sister and her siblings into a foster home, into the foster care system. But when her maternal grandfather and his wife found out about it, and they were living outside of Houston at the time and still are, and when they found out about it, they said, send them to us, because they had the resources and they had the means by which to take them in. And so the grandparents say, and I think this is absolutely adorable, that after seeing Simone do endless somersaults in their living room, they decided, mostly out of self-preservation, to sign her up for some gymnastic classes. And, the rest, as they say, is history. Well, except for that discipline part, right? Years and years and hours of training to have the self-discipline to train, to make herself do this regularly. This is why Simone Biles has already made history regardless of what happens in Tokyo this summer. And so you've heard me say over these last weeks that faith is like a muscle, right? You got to use it or lose it. And so I am inviting you to Simone Biles your faith. You got to Simone Biles your faith. And so what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that, when you think about the practices that you were taught, the disciplines that you were taught or not growing up, for some of us, we didn't have a whole lot of that, right? But whatever was happening in that original environment that you were raised in, I want you to know that that does not define you. Now, if you have some of these practices and these disciplines that you happily take with you, then that's amazing. But for many of us, we were not taught this or taught something maybe not helpful, right? And so what I want you to know with crystal clarity today is that this does not define you. Today, you have the choice of what you practice. You have the choice of what you do regularly. You have the choice of what you create as a habit. You get to choose that. And so my prayer for you today is that you will willingly, as it is said in the Gospel of Matthew, to seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these things will be added unto you. Now, I'm sure you all know that hymn, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, right? Do you remember that? Or maybe that's new to you, but if you grew up in church, you probably remember that. So in other words, be willing to put first things first. And so your heart work, are you ready for this? Your heart work is a 30-day challenge. That's your heart work, a 30-day challenge. And during this 30-day challenge, I want you to seek first the kingdom of God by doing two things. Number one, spend the first minutes of your day with God. Get a daily devotional. Now, of course, I love the Daily Word because Unity publishes the Daily Word. And if you are already subscribed to the Daily Word, that's fantastic. But you can also go to dailyword.com and get it for free if you would like. But get some kind of a devotional. Be willing to open the scriptures, right? Pray. Spend, a few moments in prayerful discernment to hear that still small voice of God. Create a gratitude journal. Right? One of the best ways to move forward is to be in gratitude. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to spend all of your minutes in prayer with God. I'm just asking you to spend the first minutes of the day with God. Number two, I'm inviting you to put your money where your faith is. Now, here's what I mean by that. Allow yourself to create a sacred space, to develop a deeper financial practice of giving consistently. In other words, discipline yourself to be generous. Why? Because for some of us, this just doesn't come natural, right? So you're going to have to learn to build that giving muscle. You're going to have to learn to flex that giving muscle. And so you can decide what percentage that is. That's completely up to you in your own prayerful discernment. But be a proactive giver. Practice giving consistently. And so again, you don't have to give all your dollars, right, to God, just the first dollars, right? The law of circulation is one of the most powerful spiritual disciplines when we practice it. When you practice it, it can change your life for the better. I promise you that. And so that's your heart work, a 30-day challenge to seek first the kingdom of God. Now, what did Jesus tell us? Of course, that the kingdom is at hand. It is nearer than our own breath. It is within us. So you can do this. You can do this. You're just going to have to shift a little gear, make the decision, and then step into self-discipline. First, by spending the first minutes of your day with God. And then second, by putting your money where your faith is. And remember, there is no progress without discipline. And so ends our message for today. Thank you, and God bless you.